What's good, YouTube? Beaty.Money back here for installment number 2 of my music theory for producer series. And if you did not have a chance to check out the first episode, please go back and watch it. It lays the foundation for how we're going to be approaching theory moving forward. And last episode we spoke about the chromatic scale and major scales. And as you can see here, I have the C major scale written as before. And remember, if you watched the last episode, I spoke about scale degrees. And this is very important because today's topic, we're going to be talking about chords and how to, the different types of chords. I'm not going to talk so much about like chord changes per se, but we're going to lay the foundation so we can have that discussion, right? Because music is a language, and I'm trying to teach you guys some basic vocabulary here. This is what the very basics are about. So we're going to go through the different types of chords. There is triads and there is 7 chords, and that's pretty much all we're going to talk about today. As you can see here, I spoke last week about numbers, right? Scale degrees. We have the major scale, which comprises of technically 8 notes if you count the octave. 8 is the octave, but I can just go up to the 7 here. And when we're talking about chords, there's 2 different types of chords, right? There's triads and 7 chords. Those aren't the only types, but those are largely what makes up a lot of the chord changes that you'll see, especially when you're trying to make your own beats and you're trying to come up with different harmonies and stuff like that. Because the thing about hip-hop music is, as opposed to maybe jazz or classical music, is oftentimes hip-hop is based off of a loop or a melody, and usually it's like, 2, 4, sometimes 8, 16 bars at the most. Generally, you don't see hip-hop going through a ton of changes, and while there has been beats that have been made with things like Coltrane changes and stuff like that, I feel that hip-hop is generally more modal based. It tends to stick to a certain color, and unless there's a switch up within the beat, and maybe it'll switch to a different loop and different set of a few changes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lay out all the different types of kind of basic chords. So if you guys don't know any music theory, this will help you build and kind of like experiment on your own to figure out different colors that you might think sound cool. And also give you some vocabulary so that you can start building this foundation to build your own house of how you approach harmony and theory, right? So, 2 different types of chords. We have triads and we have 7 chords. To start, we're going to start off with triads, right? And when I say a triad, tri is in the title. Tri means 3, right? So it's a chord that has 3 voices in it. The very basic chords, which is what we're talking about here today, there's a couple different types of triads. We have major, we have minor, we have diminished, and we have augmented. And that's pretty much what we're going to stop there. So for major has a few different symbols for it. Sometimes you'll see it written as a big M. Sometimes you'll see it written as M-A-J. Sometimes it's written actually just as a triangle. If you ever see a triangle and changes, it means major. So for example, if we're going to have C major, how do we get a major triad? Okay, last week I was speaking about scale degrees. A major triad is built off of the 1, this note, the 3, and the 5. And as you can see here, the 1 is C, the 3 is E, and the 5 is G. So if I stack it up in its own staff, right, let's draw this here. C major triad. C, E, and G, right? This is major. So you'd often see, sometimes you'll see it written as C instead of music. Sometimes it might be just a C with a little triangle next to it. Sometimes it might have the M or the M-A-J. For this purpose, we're just going to do that. We're just going to put a C with a major with a triangle next to it, okay? The next one is minor. Minor is a very common color within hip-hop. I would argue that a lot of my beats are minor. I like that dark sound. And again, to get the minor triad, it's the same thing as the major, right? So we have minor, which is sometimes written as little m, but that gets confusing if you're writing chord changes out and you write with big M's and little m's. Sometimes if your handwriting's not like super on point, it will get confusing. But oftentimes it's just a simple minus sign, okay? Now, for minor, remember we have, for the major we have 1, 3, and 5. For minor, we have 1, flat 3, and 5, okay? So, here's the major chord, right? For here, we're going to put 1, flat 3, and 5, right? So here's a C major, right? 1, 3, 5. For minor, 1, flat 3, 5, right? So here we have the flat 3. And that's how you make a minor chord, a minor triad, that is. Okay? Now we're going to talk about diminished. Okay? Diminished chords, in my opinion, are more of a, they're used more in passing. They're not really a sound that we tend to land on. Can't think of any examples off the top of my head of a beat that has a diminished, that's built off of diminished only, especially like newer. You might have like some older hip hop that was sampled from some random jazz record where they happen to grab a loop from somebody playing a diminished chord, but I don't know, I can't think of anything off the top of my head right now. Maybe make a comment if you know of a diminished hip hop beat inside the, I'd like to build up an arsenal of that stuff. So diminished, so sometimes you'll see diminished written like this. Sorry again, my handwriting looks like I've had a stroke. Sometimes you see it written as DIM period, but the most common is just simply a circle. Okay? What is diminished? Diminished is 1, flat 3, and a flat 5. So we're having this 1, 3, 5, but in order to get these different colors, we're altering the 3 and the 5, right? So we're flatting this 3 and we're flatting this 5. So what notes that makes? That makes C, E flat, and G flat, right? Now remember, we had major first, we have minor, which is 1, flat 3, 5. Now we have diminished, 1, flat 3, flat 5. Some people say, like, if you listen to like old or watch old cartoons, and the damsel in distress is on the railroad tracks, because you have, we're not getting to intervals today, but when you have this flat 5, this G flat, right? C, E flat, G flat, you have a tritone. Tritone split the octave in half, but again, we're not going to get too in depth to that right now. We're going to stick to just simply chords. So C, E flat, G flat, 1, flat 3, flat 5. Now there's one more triad that I want to speak about today, and that is called the augmented triad. So remember, we had major, no alterations to these 3 notes. We had minor, which we flatted to 3, right? C, E flat, G. Then we had diminished, which we flat 3, flat 5. Now we're going to have another one. Now this one is called augmented, right? And often you might see it written as AUG period, maybe. But more often than not, it's simply written as a plus sign. Now, what is augmented? We have that 1, the 3 is unaltered, and then we have a sharp 5, okay? So, augmented. Now, what does that look like? Again, we have the C triad right here. We're going to have C, we have an E, and then we have a sharp 5, a G. So C, E sharp, G. It sounds like this. Which has a cool sound to it, in my opinion. Again, this chord, to me, it has a little bit more stopping power than diminished per se. But it's not. I think more often than not in hip hop, things are either going to be minor or major. You don't really hear too much of people building augmented beats. Now you could, let's say somebody sampled Juju by Wayne Shorter from his classic Blue Note record, right? That's a totally augmented. The whole chord changes are made from augmented chords, and you have that whole tone sound. And I'm not going to talk about the whole tone scale. Remember whole, half, and all that stuff. A lot of scale options come out of that. But sticking to augmented, 1, 3, sharp 5. So to recap triads, we have the major, minor, flat 3, diminished, and lastly augmented. Right? So there you go, triads. Now we get to 7 chords. And 7 chords, in my opinion, are kind of like, in music, they kind of came along later than triads. Earlier classical music was very based in triadic harmony. You had development sections that would go to the relative minor or maybe the 5, and then they would modulate back down, and it wasn't super hard. Not that Mozart's music isn't complex or anything like that, it's just they weren't thinking in colors the same way that they did later on. Like when you had the turn of the 19th century, you started to get expressionism and impressionism, and you started to have these types of like wonderful colors that came about. It wasn't just in music, but it was in art too. You had guys like Van Gogh and Monet, and you had like these beautiful, like colorful works, and the same was happening inside of music too during that time. You had like Ravel and Debussy, and you had Scriabin, and like all these different colors started to come into play. And in my opinion, this is when 7 chords started to really develop. Now, I come from a jazz background, so 7 chords are very like building blocks of jazz, right? I mean, early jazz was very triadic. If we listen to like Louis Armstrong or something like that, you go back and listen to it, and he's not playing a bunch of extensions and stuff. And I'll talk about chord extensions later, but as like jazz developed too to the 40s when bebop hit, Charlie Parker, then you had 7 chords already. So when you hear modern pop music, it's not uncommon for it to be triadic based, but I think a lot of the real color comes when you start throwing in these 7s, and then from further extensions, 9s, 11s, 13s. And if you like lo-fi stuff and you're trying to make lo-fi beats and things like that, it's very important to start learning these different colors, because a lot of the lo-fi stuff was samples of jazz music and stuff like that, which is very 7 chord based stuff. Okay, so without further ado, 7 chords. Okay, so 7 chords. The first one, here we still have the C major triad, and the same is true with the symbols. For major 7, you might see the M, A, J with a 7 next to it. You might see a big M with a 7, but again, like big M, little M gets confusing when you're writing the chord changes out. But my personal favorite is the triangle with a 7 next to it. If you do have music software, there is a triangle option in Sibelius or Finale, which are the 2 big ones. So how do we get the 7 chord? Remember, we built the triads, right? 1, 3, 5. We're going to do the same here. 1 of C major scale is C. The 3 is E. The 5 is G. And the B is the 7. So we're just going to build it up to here. Very distinctive quality to it. And it adds a whole nother arsenal of color, and especially when you start throwing in things like sharp 11s and things. So it's important that we kind of like start getting that under our learning these chords will do nothing but help you in your production, give you options for melodies, right? Now we're going to have the minor 7. So minor 7, like the triad, similar before, we can do. For minor, we can do little m, 7. We can do M-I-N, 7. Or my favorite is the minus 7. So it's the same thing, working off of our major scale again. 1, flat 3, 5, and flat 7, right? So we have here is the 1, right? The 3, but it's flat. The G, and the 7, but it's flat. How does it sound? Major 7, right? Nothing done to the 3 and 7. Right? 1, 3, 5, 7. Flat 3, flat 7. Now we're going to discuss one that wasn't discussed inside the triads, okay? We have the dominant chord, and the 5 chord is a really important chord. You guys that are making 808s, if you have a melody loop that's in a minor key or like a minor color, going up to that 5 it really mixes up it instead of just staying on the root or tonic, whatever you want to call it, staying on the 1. If you want to vary up your 808s, and I'm going to do a whole theory lesson on dominance and 5 chord motion and show you what mixing up your 808s does. But the dominant chord is this. For dominant, sometimes very rarely you might see it written DOM period, but most of the time it is just simply written with a 7. So if you see here, we're going to write a C7. You'll just see C with a 7 next to it, and then it's simply 1, 3. Nothing's done to the 3, 5, and flat 7. How is this going to look? C, E, G, and B flat. This is a really important chord and concept to grasp because this is a motion chord. While there's examples of songs that have been written solely around the 5 chord, like All Blues by Miles Davis, it sounds like this. Here's major. Here's dominant. 1, 3, that major triad, but with the on top, with the flat 7 on top. Right? Because the 5, this, remember when I talk about scale degrees, if I have C in the bass, what is C the 5th? What major scale is C the 5th note of? It's the 5th note of F, right? So if we pretend like this 5 is C, we count backwards. F will be the 1. So it resolves. It wants to resolve from here to right, and I'm using voice lead, and I'm not moving much. I have the crunchiness of the C, but you can really, or you can just resolve to the. You know, you have the 5 chord here, and it wants to resolve to F, right? So the 5 chord motion is really important in learning progressions because a lot of progressions want to resolve, and dominant is one of the colors that is the king resolver, I want to say, or the king, or maybe not the king resolver, but it's the king anticipator of resolution. When I feel that 5 chord, I want it to go to a certain place, and that you could make a chord change, a set of changes where the 5 chord you not make me the listener want it to go somewhere, but then you resolve it totally differently in another place, and that's the beautiful thing about 5 chords and dominant chords, is that they give you kind of this freedom to pivot and go where you want to go if you use them correctly. And we can talk about voice leading and stuff later, but this is dominant for now. 1, 3, nothing done to the 3, 5, flat 7. Now remember, in triads we had diminished and we had augmented for the last 2 that I spoke about. Now these 2 chords are a little bit different when you get to the 7, because what you do to the 7 will change what it sounds like and what its role is, okay? So first we're going to talk about diminished. Now when we get to the 7 chords, there's 2 different types of diminished chords. There is the fully diminished chord, right? So if I see for diminished, I see just simply D-I-M-7. I'm going to assume that it's fully diminished. And a fully diminished 7 chord looks like this, okay? Just a circle and a 7. I prefer that. I prefer using the symbols more so than the D-I-M. Now, there's also half diminished, right? Half diminished, you might see it written as half D-I-M 7, but that's kind of a lot to write. More often than not, it's a circle with a line through it and a 7, okay? What's the difference? For fully diminished, we have the 1, flat 3, flat 5, just like the triad, and then double flat 7. For half diminished, we have the same thing. We have the 1, flat 3, flat 5, just like the triad, and we have just 1 flat 7, not double flat. How does this look on paper? C, E flat, G flat, and B double flat for the fully diminished. And then we have C, E flat, G flat, and simply B flat for the half diminished, okay? How does this sound? Here's major. Fully diminished, 1, flat 3, flat 5, double flat 7. That's really that railroad damsel in distress sound. And it's comprised of, remember I mentioned tritones? This is a perfectly symmetrical chord, meaning it splits the octave in even parts, minor thirds, splits it in half, right? So the fully diminished chord isn't really coming out of the major scale per se, or it's not really coming out of a mode of a major scale per se. And in my opinion, it's also another passing chord. It's not really a chord that we want to land on, although you probably can make some cool beats off of that sound if you do certain stuff to it. Right, now, half diminished. It's the same thing, that flat, but it's... And the most common function of a half diminished chord you'll see is in a minor 2-5-1. We'll talk about 2-5-1s later. But minor 2-5-1, and it's used as an emotion chord too. I mean, you could probably make a dope beat out of a half diminished chord too. I think, you know, it has like a mysterious type of color to it to me. But yeah, those are the two diminished sounds. Now for the last chord that I want to speak about today. Augmented major and augmented minor, right? Augmented major and minor are definitely color chords. I don't think that they're as commonly used as the previous chords that I spoke about. Augmented major now, right? Oftentimes you might see it with the AUG, but the most common symbol for augmented major is going to be, for example, if we're talking in the key of C, C plus with a triangle and a 7, okay? That's going to be probably the most common in my opinion. What is this? It's a 1, 3, sharp 5, just like the triad, and then a natural 7. Now, how would the augmented minor look? It would look like the augmented major, but it would be C with a plus, a minus, and a 7. All right? How is that? 1, 3, sharp 5, and flat 7. Okay? How do we spell these out on the staff? For augmented major, C, E, G, sharp, just like the triad, with the B on top. In the minor, C, E, G sharp, and B flat on top. How do these colors sound? They sound like this. Here's the major chord again, for reference. Augmented major. You know, it has a specific color to it, and I would encourage you guys to figure these out in all 12 keys, because now that you have the numbers, and you'll be able to go through and you'll be able to figure out, you know, these colors for yourself. Experiment with them. Throw them inside your beats. Now the augmented dominant. Augmented minor. To me, the augmented minor chord is actually, to me, it's very much like a dominant sound, because oftentimes you might see a dominant chord with C7, for example, with the ALT, C7 altered. It has that C7 altered sound to it. So to me, this sound is like it's like a dominant chord wanting to go to a minor chord, like a 1 minor. So for example, you might see a G augmented minor chord going to a C minor chord, right? So I'll talk more in the future about chord changes and different places you can take stuff. Today's lesson was purely about showing you the symbols for chords, what they sound like, and the formulas for the chords. Just like there's a formula for the major scale, there's a formula for these chords. Okay, now that we've talked about all the different types of chords, I just want to go over one more basic concept in regards to chord changes. And this concept is chord inversions. And inversions is just basically a fancy word of saying I'm going to put the one or different parts of the chord in different, I'm going to stack it in different places. So for example, we have a major triad, right? 1, 3, and 5, right? With the 1 being on the bottom, 3, 5. If I want to do first inversion for a triad, I'm going to put, instead of putting the C on the bottom, I'm just simply putting it on the top. For second inversion in a triad, I'm going to do the same thing again, except for putting the E on the bottom. I'm going to put the C up here and then the E on top. Simple as that. And it doesn't matter which triad you're using, you can change it up. How does this sound? Here's the root position, where the 1 is in the bass, or in the bottom. Here it is on top. Same chord, it just has a slightly different color, and then here it is in second inversion. Right? It just changes the color slightly. It gives you a little bit more. It gives you option when it comes to voice leading, because again, when you're making changes, you're going to want your voice leading, meaning like the inner voices, you don't want them jumping all over the place. You want to do what you can to keep chords moving inside a linear motion, right? And it makes it sound more pleasing to the ear. Now we're going to talk about inversions in regards to 7 chords, right? So we had 2 inversions, same thing as last time. With inversions with 7 chords, we have three different types of inversions, right? We have root position, where the 1 is in the bass, and when I say, again, root means 1. First inversion, we're going to do this thing again where we take it and put the C on the top, right? C's not at the bottom, the 1's not at the bottom, the 1 is at top above the 7, okay? Second inversion, we're going to have this G, B, C, and E. So 5, 7, 1, 3. And then for the third inversion, we have the 7 right here, 1, 3, and 5. So this is third inversion, right? And it's, again, it's all the same chord. It's just where the notes are placed within the chord changes. That's it. I'm not changing any type of color. And again, you can use this with any of those 7 chords. Here's C major in root position, C major in first inversion, C major in second inversion, C major in third inversion, right? I can do it with minor, root position, first inversion, second inversion, and lastly, but not leastly, third inversion, right? And I'm just moving. When you're experimenting the versions, again, I think it's important with voice leading. But when you're first starting, you know, it's important just to learn like what a minor chord is. That it's 1 flat 3, 5 flat 7. It's just important to learn that language, learn that color. Now, if you enjoyed this lesson, I have made a PDF that you can download for free. I'm not asking for your email or nothing like that. I'm not asking for you to buy my beats. If you got something from it, please download it, and if you could please subscribe to my channel, hit that bell, and if you could just pass on the word that I'm doing these theory tutorials if you find them useful, I would greatly appreciate it. So again, it's for free. It's going to have the major scale formula in it, and it's going to have every chord and symbol that I'm talking about here in it as well. And it's just a little guide that you guys can use to start getting this stuff under your fingers, so you can start making your own melody and start experimenting with your own chord changes if you're the type of producer who's just dealing with samples right now and you're trying to learn some music theory. Because I think that being able to make your own melodies and your own chord changes and stuff is invaluable tool. You know, if you rely solely on chopping samples, that's great, but if you can make your own melodies, that opens up a whole another stream of revenue for you, right? If you're able to make your own melodies, because you could get a placement that way. You could accidentally, or not, maybe not accidentally, you could make a set of chord changes and it gets picked up by Drake, and next thing you know, you have production credit on a Drake beat, right? Over just something that you put out there as part of some loop kit or something that you did because you have this basic knowledge. So please learn this stuff, learn this language. You know, we're speaking the language of music. And if you want to be a musician for a living, then we should know our craft, right? You know, learning theory is about learning our craft, right? So please comment, like, subscribe, hit that bell. I'm going to keep putting these theory videos out. If there's a topic within music theory that you really would like me to talk about or something you don't understand, I'd be happy to talk about it. So please hit me up in my DMs, hit me up inside of the comment section, and thank you everybody for watching. I also want to thank my sponsor, The Digital Crate. Go to thedigitalcrate.com for all your loop needs, and also check out Beaty.Money. That is my website, and hope everybody's doing great. Talk to you guys later. Peace.